have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That's Nancy Pelosi at January 6th talk. Joining me now, glad he is back, Mike Benz, Executive Director for the Foundation for Freedom Online. Mike, that's an interesting video. What do you make of all that?
It's an interesting video for a few reasons. First of all, there was a fantastic article this week on the role of Mark Milley and the U.S. military in the run-up and the events of January 6th. Nancy Pelosi was, essentially in charge of Capitol security. I think that this video is a very interesting supplement to a previous one, which was recorded, I believe, with Nancy Pelosi's daughter doing sort of like a documentary in the Capitol on January 6th, where as the perimeter is being breached, Nancy Pelosi is giddy with excitement, where she said, I knew this was going to happen. I was waiting for something like this to happen. Basically, now we got him for trespassing. I don't know if you recall that video, but it came out about 8 months ago. And when you understand that in the context of, for example, this article from this week of Mark Milley and his frequent liaisoning with Nancy Pelosi, a picture is beginning to emerge here. The benign version of the picture, if you can call it that, is that they knew this was going to happen and let it happen. I happen to take a much darker view of Mark Milley's role in this. I actually don't see Nancy Pelosi as necessarily being the brains of any of this, but rather a sort of vassal vehicle for effectively a military and intelligence operation in order to kill Trumpism after Trump. You see, and I can sketch some of this out, but I put out a tweet almost a year ago where I said, as time goes on, more and more every year, every month, evidence will point in a straight line to Mark Milley for his role in January 6th. And I can sketch out the whole history of this, because I think the Pelosi thing is, yeah. So first of all, understand that domestic rent-a-riots done for political purposes by the U.S. military are not an unprecedented thing, and not just by the U.S. military, but particularly by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, exactly where Mark Milley, as chairman, occupied. See, something was declassified in the late 1990s, which your audience may be familiar with. It's called Operation Northwoods. It's something that had a lot of notoriety. It was declassified as part of the JFK Assassination Records Review Board declassifications after the popular Oliver Stone movie created this impetus to declassify a bunch of early 1960s documents. And one of the documents accidentally declassified effectively in the late 1990s was this annex to a Joint Chiefs of Staff proposal to President John F. Kennedy called Pretext to War with Cuba. And it was a proposal of menu options that the Joint Chiefs unanimously, but Lyman Lemnitzer, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, sort of Mark Milley 1.0 figure, a guy who was later promoted as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. But he made this proposal to the President, John F. Kennedy, for the military to deploy its own assets and to stage riots on the streets of U.S. cities, to occupy U.S. federal buildings, to bomb U.S. barracks in the United States, to sink U.S. ships at sea, to hijack U.S. airplanes. This is the U.S. military proposing a menu of options to the U.S. president for how U.S. military assets can conduct a false flag attack on the United States in order to create the political predicate to declare war. Now, I had a very interesting moment while I was in the White House as a speechwriter for Donald Trump, where I was asked to look up what John F. Kennedy said about his own generals and one of the quotes that he had made. There's a lot of similarities between JFK being at war with his own generals for his policy on détente with Russia, as Trump's policy for détente with Russia, putting him at odds with his own military, Mark Esper, the defense secretary, and especially Mark Milley. But understand, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have proposed doing the exact sort of rent-a-riots that we saw before. 10 years after Operation Northwoods, there was an organized riot at no less than the U.S. Capitol itself in 1971, 1972. This came out during the Church Committee hearings, where the U.S. Army basically infiltrated and effectively set up a Capitol riot by the hippie movement in order to discredit the hippie movement as being violent insurrectionists at the time when they were opposing U.S. participation in the Vietnam War. Mark Milley, on November 9th, 2020, as reported by the New York Times, had a meeting with Gina Haspel, who was then the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, who, mind you, came over from being head of the CIA station house in London, which was the exact place that plotted the Russiagate coup with the Christopher Steele dossier out of London and the Richard Dearlove MI6 networks there. And the direct phrase reported by the New York Times from Mark Milley's November 9th meeting, this is just days after the 2020 election, to Gina Haspel was, "There's a right-wing coup afoot and we need to do something to stop it." Now, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tells the head of the Central Intelligence Agency that the the sitting president is plotting a coup and we need to do something to stop it, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs does not just go back to his desk and sit there with this thumb up his butt. What happens with a predicate like that is you launch a counterintelligence mission where you direct U.S. Army assets, Marines in particular, who were actually the preferred vehicle for the Operation Northwoods plan. And strangely, about 75% of all of the frontline participants of the 12:53 p.m. breach, the initial breach of the Penn Walkway entrance of the January 6th attack, were Marines. And if you look at the strange cases around Ray Epps, for example, Marine, Maroon PB, Marine. You look at something like Scaffold Commander, who is wearing something on the back of his undershirt for service, appears to be military. You have the strange fact of the pipe bombs being completely unresolved, despite the fact that this pipe bomber spent 90 minutes walking on foot in the military home court of Capitol Hill, and yet no skin cells, no hair follicles, can't tell the race, can't tell the gender, no leads whatsoever. You also have the fact that person's eyes appear to be blurred out in the still footage from the DNC, the last footage that the FBI has uploaded, which was September 2021. Now, why would they freeze out the eyes? Well, every military person has their irises scanned. If that person was if the pipe bomber happened to have a military background, and that person's irises would show up in any database that the FBI searched. Same thing with a felon. But there's military all over this. All of the militias, for example, that participated in January 6th, who were the Oath Keepers? Oath Keepers were predominantly former military. Well, that means Army counterintelligence gets to saturate them up the wazoo. A lot of people are focused on the FBI and DHS, which had their own roles in January 6th, but the military involvement, particularly U.S. Army counterintelligence and the U.S. Marines, is something that, frankly, there should be an entire congressional subcommittee to if those documents have not been burned, and they likely all have. But there is a totally almost unexplored angle here when you understand the military history of doing these things in the past, the direct language of Mark Milley, his now stipulated actions to essentially have this thing carried out. Even Nancy Pelosi effectively punting to blame on Mark Milley's crew. And I think she's not necessarily actually wrong on that.
Jeez, it is so much to digest. I guess I have a million questions I could ask, and sadly we don't have an hour. So I guess I'll try to land on this one, Mike. Where was the Trump administration when all this stuff was going on? The Trump is the commander-in-chief. He's in charge of Mark Milley. The people underneath him, were they not telling him? Was he being lied to? Did Trump himself? What was missing here? Because this wasn't under Joe Biden. This wasn't under Joe Biden. This was under Donald Trump. What happened?
Well, what happened is, just go through a simple thought experiment here. Let's just say a taxi driver, a popular Uber driver, made a bunch of viral YouTube videos and became so popular online that he was voted to be United States president, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. Does anyone think that the top brass of the United States military, our Central Intelligence Agency, our National Security Agency, would just hand over their secrets to this random taxi cab driver who got voted to be U.S. president because of his popular TikTok videos? There's no way. They would not hand over the keys to the kingdom here. The U.S. Intelligence Committee and community and our military brass in early 2017 were having internal public deliberations about whether or not they should even tell Trump what's going on with his own military and intelligence. And there was a shell game the entire time. If you remember, this actually came out post-presidency where I think it was I don't know if it was Mark Esper or one of the former secretaries of defense came out and said that actually they had sort of played shell games with Trump and they sort of lied to him about how many troops were actually in Syria and what they were really doing there, and that they sort of deliberately withheld certain nominations until they knew that he was going to be out. That they were constantly going behind his back. They were constantly giving him partial or false information in order to try to rig his decision-making process to be more favorable to the institutional military agenda that has existed from Truman to Trump. And that's particularly this Seize Eurasia policy. The fact is the military is the battering ram of the commercial and financial forces that these military officials all float into to make their millions post-government. Just like Mark Milley is surfing on cash, on tidal waves of cash from all of his speaker fees and book deal and the sinecures that he's getting from these exact firms, or they all go into these hedge funds or these Goldman funds to do macroeconomic forecasting because they happen to have buddies still in the agency who tell them what countries are about to be overthrown, so you know what you can loot next. And so these firms all have been invested in this Seize Eurasia policy because this Eurasian subcontinent sits on $75 trillion worth of natural resources. All of these U.S. multinational corporations have already invested the infrastructure for that looting process. If there's peace with Russia, if there's détente with respect to our CIA regime change operations in Central and Eastern Europe or in Central Asia, all those investments go to donuts, basically. And so they want to destroy any president who might get in the way of that particular Seize Eurasia policy. And what's really, really interesting also, Jesse, is go back and look at the Transition Integrity Project documents that became public in June 2020, where in June 2020, you had the former head of the RNC, Michael Steele, the former head of the DNC, Donna Brazile. You had Lawrence Wilkerson and a ton of these U.S. Army generals and colonels who all got together with this simulation plan of how to stop Trump from winning the election, even if he won the Electoral College. They ran 4 simulations. In Simulation 3 on page 17, it's on my Twitter timeline at Mike Ben Cyber. If you look this up, they specifically planned that if Trump won the election in a fair and square electoral victory, they could still steal it and have Joe Biden be inaugurated by provoking a breakdown on January 6th. They even said the date in June 2020. These military intelligence and political folks at the highest level of our DC power structure literally plotted to, quote, invoke a breakdown on January 6th. That was the move played in the simulation by by Joe Biden's surrogate, effectively role playing Joe Biden in that simulation.
Ugh.
Who was the surrogate? It was John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager and now runs the largest slush fund in all of Washington, a $380 billion green energy fund as the White House czar.
I want you to picture this. I want you to picture 9/11, that terrible day it happens. And let's say you're a patriotic young man and you decide you're going to sign up and go fight for your country. Maybe you join the Marines. You go fight. Maybe you get out after 4-8 years. Maybe you've got an injury. You need some medical care. And so after you're out, you have to go to the VA. And let's say you stop by the VA in Northport, New York. Well, if you're there receiving care as you stride up to the VA, you'll be greeted by a pride flag that's approximately double the size of the American flag you actually fought for. If you're one of those veterans, how does that make you feel? What you fought for and what's become of it? It freaking disgusts me is what it makes me feel like. Joining me now, Joy Pullman, executive editor of The Federalist. Also, she wrote a book on a lot of this stuff. You need to read it if you want to understand what you're looking at. It's called False Flag. Joy, I got to be honest, I'm freaking grossed out. Maybe I'm just 42 and I'm just a mean old curmudgeon at this point in time. I'm so tired of being grossed out by my country.
I mean, I'm right there with you, Jesse, and thank you for having me on. I love your show, follow it all the time. This is super exciting for me. We'll skip past that. Maybe that's gross too. And I think the grossness is that absolutely. I mean, I have at least a whole chapter in the book talking about how many of our ruling class really think that the United States Constitution is epitomized by the pride flag, by the sexual behavior that it stands for, by the fake rights that it stands for that are erasing the Constitution. And the truth is that the people who support the pride flag, these people explicitly say that they want to end heteronormativity. You know what that means? That means making the norm to be someone who is not a heterosexual. These people are not looking for tolerance. They're looking for conquest and submission. And we have a lot of our top ruling leaders, including those of our military, acting like that is the whole point of the United States, the freedoms that men in uniform are fighting for. When we all know that that is a replacement constitution, that is a false constitution, a regime change that is displacing the original one that most people, and in fact, all patriots, are the one, that's what they really want. They want that original constitution that's being displaced with this regime change that's epitomized by that pride flag.
Joy, one of the things that hits me is how fast all this happened, which is another reason why I'm glad you wrote the book. I honestly, again, I hate to make myself sound old, but life was normal when I was a kid, and that's not ancient history. Now you want to turn on the new Star Wars thing, they're going to gay that thing up. You can't turn on the television anymore. Everything's got to be gay. You can't go to third grade social studies without some whack job teacher telling you to chop your penis off. It's all over the place. How did it happen so fast? How did this conquering religion gain so much ground so quickly? What were we doing when they were doing all this?
Well, the gay jihad did not happen overnight, and the people perceive that, but it actually has been a very long time building. So I go through in my book actually tracing the antecedents of this all the way back to Woodrow Wilson and FDR, progressives' so-called living constitution, which really is no constitution at all. They created the origin of group rights in order to supplant our individual liberties that are supposed to be secured by that constitution. So as writers like Christopher Caldwell have pointed out, the United States has essentially been living with two constitutions for maybe a century now. And we're seeing that the progressives' living constitution is epitomized again by the pride flag, by sexual depravity and the sexual politics and into everything. That constitution, so-called, is overtaking our original one. So I talk about in the book, I go through the entire Bill of Rights, and I show how sexual politics erases every single one of them, including the Second Amendment rights. There's efforts, of course, by the Biden administration to be, erasing guns because, of course, they're a threat to specifically gay people. So everywhere that you don't think sexual politics could possibly apply, that's already being done, partly thanks to Neil Gorsuch and his Bostock decision, which gave the Biden administration a pretext to do what they were going to do already, which is transgender every single thing that the federal government can get its hands on, which at that point is pretty much everything.
Yeah, thanks for that, Neil. Joy, what do these people want? Is it just about destroying the family? That's how I've always taken it, all the LGBTQ filth. what it does really is it shatters the families. People aren't creating families. You got 25% of young people now who are gay. So that's men not marrying women and making babies, which wrecks a country. Is that all it's about?
Yes, I mean, I think that's directly what it's about, because the natural family, the biological family, is the institution that creates society. First of all, it is the institution that, from its authority, the existence of government proceeds. So if you destroy the family, then you can control the entire culture. A natural family is, autonomous. It creates itself. Naturally, you put a man and woman together, they make babies together. You don't do that if you put a man and a man together or a woman and a woman together. There is no family created by their intersection. So a natural family is self-creating and autonomous, and it provides for most of its own needs. People who have a natural functioning family embedded ideally within a greater extended family, they don't have a lot of need for the government. And so people who want to have a totalitarian government, who want the government to be your mother and your father and your brother and your sister and your neighbor and your aunt and your uncle, they have to erase all of the people who are already filling those functions. And that's your family. And we're, as you point out, we're well on our way there. People who don't have brothers, sisters, aunts, and uncles, they're alienated, they're isolated, they're lonely. They have nothing to identify with, especially, now that our country is something they're not allowed to identify with. They're not allowed to be patriots. America is hated. So all of the things that give people a natural identity have been erased, as the scholar Mary Eversat points out. And, I talk about her in my book. So tearing people away from everything that used to give them roots leaves them ripe for replacing that with, guess what? Government. And government is not only, your daddy and your mother and your brother and your sister for the leftists, it's also their God.
There's no way Joe Biden is going to remain. There's no way these people in power are going to risk that power on this dementia-addled old fool.
This is about raw, bare-knuckled power when it comes to getting the votes you need in the places you need them, early voting, ballot harvesting, mail-in voting, the propaganda machinery of all that stuff, propaganda machinery of the Democrats. You bring all that together and you could elect a turnip as the Democrat, and that's basically what they're going to do again. I would give you, I don't know how else to put this other than, we got to put a bet on this one. Whatever the most expensive lobster and all you can eat scampi option is at Red Lobster, you are going to be, you're going to have to pay for it for me if I'm right, and put on my Red Lobster bib with a photo taken. Okay, I want Jesse Kelly doing the bib for me of Red Lobster. All you can eat scampi, my man. That stuff doesn't come cheap. So I'm trying to get you prepared for this, and I will make good on my side of the bet too. If you are right, you can go Alaskan crab legs. It's been a good year in radio. We could do Alaskan crab legs for you at Red Lobster.
I actually forgot about the bib thing until Matt just played that back for Buck and I right now. Dang it. All right, Buck. I am curious. Joining me now, of course, Buck Sexton, host of the biggest radio show in the country, the acclaimed Buck Show. Buck, I am curious. I need you to shoot me straight here. We're friends. How confident are you still in the wake of the news today, the Hunter Biden news? Joe Biden is obviously not getting any better at public speaking. How confident are you still that they're going to ride this pony all the way into the election?
Well, look, I'm glad that you're starting it out that way. And let me also note that I didn't realize in that clip, the all-you-can-eat shrimp, I apparently am a prophet when it comes to knowing that Red Lobster is going to go bankrupt, because I was like, that's expensive. Yeah, turns out it was so expensive that they have to go into restructuring. Anyway, in terms, it's just the way it is, just the facts. I'm glad that you're not approaching me like a degenerate gambler who's asking for just $5 more to put on a pony after he's lost everything here. There is no way, okay? There is no way that they're going to replace Joe Biden with anyone other than Kamala Harris. And I'm going to tell you something. I've talked to some people who are, the ones that I always want to hear from on this issue are, they aren't insane, which means they like Trump, right? I mean, even I'll give credit to Russell Brand. He's basically like, if you're not crazy, you're going to vote for Trump this time. Like, if you're not completely opposed to like freedom and all that is good in the world, you're going to vote for Trump, not Biden. Okay. The debate, though, from people I know who are pro-Trump, but not everything he does is perfect, they're a little concerned about how this debate ends up going. because for one thing, the expectations for Biden are so low, and we all know that, that he may come out of the debate with a bump, and that may create some momentum. And I think even beyond that, they're going to ask Trump who won the 2020 election on stage with, tens of millions of people watching. And you and I both know how that's going to go. Trump's just not going to back off that one bit. So I think Biden is banking it all on the turnaround, or the beginning of the turnaround, I should say, that'll happen on that debate stage. There are drugs. I found this out. There are things they can give people to help with mental acuity and stuff because of dementia. I thought that was just a thing that people talked about. That's real. I've had doctors call into the show and say, no, there are, I forget the name of it, but there are stuff you can give people. They'll give it to them.
There is. No, and they very clearly have been giving it to him. Everyone remembers the State of the Union. He was so hopped up on amphetamines. He looked like Hunter S. Thompson up there. Everyone knows they're giving him something to try to get him through whatever he's getting through. Yeah. Yeah, I used the wrong Hunter. How could I do that? It was spoon-fed for me. You know what? Let's go actually there, Buck. Okay, Hunter gets convicted today. It's not a small deal. We've all accepted that Hunter Biden's a criminal. Everyone knows it because he records his crimes. But it is a big deal that the son of the president is now a convicted felon, or is it anymore? Are we so used to all this stuff, Trump's convicted, Hunter's convicted, that it's not that important?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't move the needle. I think that people don't care, and especially because this is the most really low level from a public interest perspective. I don't know where you are on this. I actually think this law is kind of a garbage law. And I say that knowing that it's being used against our enemies right now politically. So, that's to the good. It is the law. So if you're going to get Trump on a business records error, from years ago, law is a law, right? So that's what they're saying. But just as a principle matter, I think that this thing about if you've been using weed, you can't buy a gun and you're a felon if you do. Anyway, put that aside. I don't think anyone really cares. The big stuff is this selling influence to China, money laundering, obviously tax evasion, failure to register as a foreign agent, which again, I don't think failure to register as a foreign agent, I didn't used to think that was a big deal, but it was when it came to Trump and Paul Manafort and all the rest of it. So if those are the rules, right, they got to play by the rules too. We have to make them play by the rules too. Which hasn't been happening nearly as much as it should. So no, I don't think anyone cares. I mean, Hunter's not going to spend it. Tell me if you disagree with any of this. Hunter's not going to spend a day in prison. So there's really no loss to him. I mean, everyone knows Biden's going to pardon him. It's funny that he says he's not, you know what I mean? But of course he's going to pardon his son. So we'll see.
Yeah, of course he's going to pardon his son. You know what? We're going to switch gears because you brought up old Trump, and the VP talk has been hot and heavy out there. You had Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin on your show, asked him about the VP stuff. This is what he said.
Have you talked to Trump or his team at all about being on this ticket potentially as a vice president? Have they reached out?
The reality, of course, is that I have been focused on the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I stay focused on the Commonwealth of Virginia. I've got a big job, which I love, and also there's huge talent in the Republican Party. And so I, of course, know all the names and the people that have been tossed around, and I deeply respect all of them. And I think it would be a great ticket with any of them. And so I am very, very confident in our ability to work hard for the president to be competitive in Virginia. And I think we got a real shot at it.
The most political answer I've ever heard in my life. These guys are such masters at saying absolutely nothing. But the VP thing, okay, Buck, you saw the short list. I have some loves, I have some hates on there, but it's not about me. What's smart for Trump? Who does he pick?
Well, first, just on the Youngkin answer there, that's not the response of somebody who's going to be Trump's VP. That's the response of somebody who's going to run for president in 2028. I think that's very clear. He's not in the mix for Trump VP. I don't think he wants that job. I don't think he would take that job, quite honestly. I think the same is true of Governor DeSantis in Florida. On the list you have there, okay, I'm just going to lay it out. I mean, I can do a sort of a rapid fire on this. Keep it up there for a second. J.D. Vance, I've said I think he should be the guy, and I've said I think he will be the guy. Rust Belt voters, white working class voters are going to determine this election. It's going to be determined in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Georgia maybe too, but I mean, those are the big three: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. J.D. Vance can speak to the white working class voters there. I know now he's a fancy venture capital guy who went to Yale, but he grew up, as everyone knows, from Hillbilly Elegy in very sort of difficult white working class circumstances. Anyway, Marco Rubio, I mean, Marco is fine. I got nothing bad to say about him. I think he's learned a lot since the days of the Gang of Eight Senate bill, which was an amnesty bill. I think he burned his hand on that. I think he burned his hand trying to tangle with Trump in 2016, but he's good on foreign policy stuff. The donors like him. He's slick. He brings the Latino component to it. Tim Scott, nice guy. Not good on BLM, if you remember back in 2020. And also he helped sink a federal judge in a way that I thought was I did not like it. So I think that Tim Scott is a very nice person from what I can tell. I don't know him. He seems like a very good man overall. But I don't think he'll win many black votes. So if it's about trying to get more of the black vote, I just don't believe that will happen. Elise Stefanik, good on Israel, but a liberal Republican. So take that for what it's worth. She's worried about climate change. Byron Donalds, is he really in contention? I haven't really heard that, but I'd have to look into Byron's record more. It seems like a good dude. And then Ben Carson, a real doctor, unlike Jill Biden. Ben Carson is an impressive man, a soft-spoken, brilliant, very decent man. I can't see that being that, because I think Trump doesn't really I think he doesn't want to have a brawler in the mix. You know what I mean? It's like you don't want two guys in the bar who are ready to throw punches quickly. And so Ben Carson would be a calming influence on Trump, I think, to the degree that that's possible.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, the VP should be what you're not. Buck, that's all we have time for today. Appreciate you, my friend. I can't wait for you to buy me Red Lobster when they shove Joe Biden out the door.
I think there's a lot to be hopeful about, actually. When you look at the landscape right now, all over the country, lawmakers are standing up for children. They're enacting laws such as the SAFE Act all over the country, legislation that protects kids from irreversible surgeries, hormones, and puberty blockers. And even further, these detransitioners are speaking up in a way that they never have before. When Chloe Cole was transitioning, there were no people out there to warn her against this. She didn't have any major media figures saying, this is dangerous, don't do this. Several years ago, we didn't have any high-profile advocates for women's spaces and women's sports. And now we have people like Riley Gaines and Paula Scanlon, who are so articulate and really standing up and standing out.
Paula Scanlon. Someone should track her down so we can talk to her about all that. And we did. Joining me now, ambassador for the Independent Women's Forum, former UPenn swimmer. She's one of the ladies who had to swim against that dude who still had a penis. And we're going to talk to Paula now about that whole thing. Paula, first of all, I'm sorry you had to swim against a dude in college. That friggin' sucks. Can you please just tell people your story and how all that came to be? Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me on. I was a member of the University of Pennsylvania women's swim team, where, of course, I had a normal swimming team experience my first year, and then the beginning of my sophomore year, a member of the men's team named Will comes to all of us and says, I identify as a woman. Please refer to me with she, her pronouns, and I will be joining your team next season. And of course, COVID happened. It gets delayed. And before you know it, I'm a senior in college, supposed to be the last year of my career in swimming. And he joins our team. He quickly breaks all of the records in every event that he swims. He then goes on to qualify for NCAAs, which, by the way, most people in the Ivy League do not even qualify for that meet at all. And then he went on to become the first ever man to win a women's NCAA title, which, yes, that photo right there flashing before me, that is his championship win there. But in the experience, it was as crazy as it sounds. The administration went to great lengths to silence us. We were told that if we objected to it, that we were the problem. And if we ever spoke out about it publicly, we would never be able to get a job. We would be tainted by this for the rest of our lives, and we would be on the wrong side of history. And finally, they told us if we continue to object, please seek psychological services. And they gave us the number for a therapist. As it sounds, us women who object to undressing next to a man, 18 times per week, we had to do this, 6'4" tall man. And again, they told us again, if we objected, we were the problem. And no one stood up for us. So I said to myself and Riley and a bunch of other girls, if we can't expect them to stand up for us, we had to do it for ourselves. And that's why a bunch of us are now speaking out about this issue and raising awareness to not just the unfairness in sports, but also the silencing of all of it. Again, we were told if we had opinions on this, we should not share them publicly. And if we ever did, our life would be over.
Jeez. Okay, setting aside just the heebie-jeebies it gives me to realize that all those young women had to change in front of a dude that many times a week, but just set that aside for a moment because that's really gross. You say we were told. I'm not asking you to name names, but who's coming to you and saying these things to you? Is it coaches? Is it professors? Are we talking about just some dirty commie activist on the quad? Who's coming to you and saying, shut your mouth or your life will be ruined?
Well, I mean, I can paint the picture for you very clearly. There was this day we got this email that said mandatory team meetings, this time, pool stands, every member of the women's team, you must be there. And our coaches were at this meeting, but they were pushed aside into the corner, and they brought in multiple people from the athletic department, so liaisons to the AD, the athletic director. They brought in activists from the LGBTQ center. They brought in a representative from psychological services. They brought in a bunch of other random administrators that probably shouldn't have jobs anyway and are making way too much money to do absolutely nothing at all. All of those people were it was a whole panel of, I didn't even realize there was that many administrators that were available to be sent to this meeting at the time. But of course, you know college campuses, the bureaucracy of it, they find people and they brought us a whole panel to try to scare us. And actually after that, they would keep sending representatives from the athletic department to watch over our meets. They accompanied us on training trips to say, we're here to help. They're not here to help. They're here to say, we're watching you guys, and we want to make sure our message is loud and clear, and you've heard every single word we've said this entire season. Shut your mouth.
You are doing a lot of things there as Attorney General of Missouri, and I love it. I love it that at least some of our red state AGs are starting to get more aggressive. Can you talk about Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Planned Parenthood has a documented history in the state of Missouri of placing the destruction of human life ahead of the health and safety of women and children. My predecessor, Josh Hawley, as Attorney General, uncovered that Planned Parenthood was using a moldy abortion machine on women. I'm not talking about a machine they forgot to clean and left in the corner, one they were actively using on patients, refusing to comply with health and safety standards imposed by the state of Missouri. My immediate predecessor, Eric Schmidt, uncovered that agents of Planned Parenthood refused to comply with state statutes regarding retention of records of the procedures they were performing and necessary notification of warning to patients before they engaged in these risky procedures. And now, in late 2023, the Project Veritas video from the clinic in Kansas City revealed agents of Planned Parenthood bragging about trafficking minors across state lines without parental consent and without complying with state mandatory notification statutes and forging documents in the process to obtain abortions for minors who were victims of sexual assault. My office launched a lawsuit to fight back. We've got to eliminate Planned Parenthood. They do not serve the best interests of the people of the state of Missouri. And again, this is a documented history of placing the destruction of human life ahead of the health and safety of their patients.
Gosh, it's so wonderful to hear an elected official in the GOP talk like this. Where are the rest of you? I'm very, very frustrated with the state of the GOP in this country. And I know I'm speaking to someone who's not part of that, but I'm very frustrated with the inaction, this hands-off approach to these people, as if we can live and let live with people who just slaughter babies like this and do things like this. You can't live with these people. We have to get them out.
No, I totally agree. And, at the end of the day, I think there's a big difference between being academic law school tough and being warrior tough. When I joined the United States Army before law school to fight in the war on terror, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Was proud to lead that fight in the battlefields in the war on terror and to come back home and be now leading that fight in courtrooms across the state of Missouri and across the nation. I think that this is the show me state. And here in Missouri, results matter. And I'm not interested in political talk. I'm interested in delivering wins for the freedom, safety, and prosperity of the people of the state of Missouri.
let's talk about the student loan debt relief thing. Joe Biden's doing something illegal, and it's really wild. He gives speeches all the time now saying the Supreme Court said no, but that didn't stop me. Now, maybe my civics are a little out of whack, but I didn't think that was allowed. What's happening with all this?
Yeah, look, this is a constitutional crisis. You've got the president openly defying an order from the United States Supreme Court to illegally and unconstitutionally attempt to buy votes on the eve of an election in a key demographic that he's losing ground to day in and day out. He knows it's illegal. He knows the Supreme Court told him no, and he is so untethered from any kind of decency or reality that he's out on the stump bragging about his willful violation of the law and the Constitution. Americans should be appalled by this. If President Trump had attempted this, the left would have been appalled and they would have pilloried him. And yet here, President Trump gets a pass. Look, even if you think that the president should redistribute $500 billion of wealth and saddle working families with Ivy League debt, surely we can agree that there's a process in place to do that. And it's the United States Congress. The Supreme Court last June handed down its decision in the first iteration of this case and determined that Congress doesn't hide an elephant in a mouse hole. In other words, if Congress intends to grant the president that kind of expansive authority, the president has to point to explicit textual authority in a federal statute. Congress has twice rejected such bills, once in 2019 and again in 2021. Nothing has changed since the Supreme Court handed down its decision in this case last year. Missouri is uniquely situated in these cases because we have standing thanks to the fact that we administer student loan payments and repayments through the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, MOHELA, which is an instrumentality of the state. That was a centerpiece of our win in the Supreme Court last term, and we believe it'll result in the court staying the president's plan in the Eastern District of Missouri in our litigation now.
Can you, to wrap this whole thing up, can you explain what you view the role of red states going forward is? It's very obvious to me that at least under Joe Biden and Democrats, this government is going to be hostile to a lot of people in their way of life in ways that it never really has in this country. Red states, especially red state AGs, more so than even governors, need to protect their citizens, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it goes beyond just open hostility. I think President Biden and those on the woke left threaten our very existence. Again, this isn't about free, fair, and open debate. They want to censor the right. They want to persecute and prosecute the right. They want to eliminate from public discourse any viewpoint they disagree with, and they think they can use the government to do that. It is incumbent upon red states to be the vanguard in the fight against this kind of open attacks on our way of life and on our system of government and our very the very essence of who we are as the United States of America.